So that being said, this week's focus is on monetizing your audience, and we have some good guests lined up. We had 4 guests originally. One had to had an emergency where she had to go pick up her children at school, and the other one had developed like a migraine. But we have 2 today. Still, one is Carla Zanoni. She was the head of audience development at multiple publishers. I met her when she was running audience development for kind of a series of local news sites called DNA Info. She then went on to run audience development for the Wall Street Journal, and then she went on to have an audience development role at TED, for the famous TED Talks. And there, not only did she help with audience development, but she worked on the team that launched its paid membership strategy. So she'll have a lot of insights on that. The other person we have is Ryan Sager. Ryan has a deep background in publishing and ad sales, and he recently co-founded Who Sponsors Stuff, which is kind of like a paid database that has a very strong overview over the entire advertising market. Basically, and he can explain it a little bit better when we call on him, but it basically, he keeps track of who is advertising in all the major newsletters in terms of brands, but also has a database of people, or the contacts at each of those companies that are advertising, so that if you are a publisher, you're looking for advertisers, you can see who is advertising in your competitors' newsletters, and then you can actually reach out to them, because it's a little bit easier to secure an advertising sale with someone who's already advertising on other newsletters. So he can talk a little bit about that. And then one other thing is, I only asked my special guests to stay for an hour, but going forward, I think I'm just going to stay on afterwards in case anybody wants to chat with me about anything they want to talk about going forward. So it looks like Carla hasn't joined yet. I'm not sure what's going on there, but Ryan, let's start with you. So can you give us just like a very kind of brief overview of like what Who Sponsors Stuff is and how it works?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Simon. So yeah, just to give you the background. So my start in newsletters was really, my background before that was media, like Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine. And my start in newsletters was at a company called Ladders, where I came on to build out a content program there, basically about career in the workplace. And we inherited a pretty big email list, a couple million subscribers. And so we turned that into a daily newsletter. So along with my now co-founder, Jesse Watkins, we monetized that into kind of a $2.5 million a year business, just on the back of like direct email ad sales. And so after Ladders, we were doing some third-party sales for some folks like 1440 and TLDR, the tech newsletter. And what we started doing just internally for ourselves was, one of those insights Simon mentioned was like, if somebody's already advertising in the newsletter space, like it's tremendously easier. It's a much shorter conversation sales cycle to get them to advertise on another newsletter. So we started tracking just for ourselves, who's sponsoring what. And as we built that out, we realized that this was actually kind of an awesome data tool. And so we built that up to where we're now tracking like 350 or so newsletters. We get all those daily and process those with a human team and find all the contacts. And so, we're working now with about 50 publishers, everyone from like Morning Brew and Flipboard down to a lot of awesome startups like Moby and The Flyover. And so, we just about 75 new sponsors we find every week, and we provide that data to our clients to go out and sell ads. So, we're big believers in the ad market. So most of my expertise here in this conversation will really be around sponsorships. I've certainly worked other places with subscriptions. So, to my limited knowledge base there, I'm happy to weigh in. But just interested to hear folks' questions and provide what insight I can.
Okay. Okay, great. Carla is joining now. So to start with, and anybody put any questions in the chat, and I will call on you, but in the meantime, I'll get started with the questions. Hey, Carla, thanks for joining us. We just kind of got started. We're talking to Ryan now, and then we'll switch over to you. So Ryan, so obviously newsletters are nothing new. They've been around for 30 plus years, but it seems like obviously it's within the last few years that they've really heated up, and the marketplace is really starting to notice it. Do you feel like it's only within recently that advertisers are really waking up to the power of newsletters as like a brand and advertising vehicle?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, obviously, people go back. I think we have Ernie on here from TDM. I mean, there's a great history of newsletters that went back a long way into print, the print world. So that's been around for a while. But yeah, email newsletters. I mean, I think you really have to credit Morning Brew. Breaking was one of the real things that made brands wake up to that. And so, yeah, that was, what was that, 18, 19. So it's really has been like in the last few years that brands have started realizing that this is a huge email marketing channel, huge marketing channel. I also think in the last year or two, we've seen, the degradation of social channels, Facebook just degrading tremendously as an advertising platform. God help us, Twitter. So, we've really seen people looking, to spend their digital budgets with really engaged audiences where they have a little more control, and email is where a lot of those dollars seem to be going. And from a publisher perspective or an operator perspective, it's just such a great channel because you own your audience. Obviously Simon's an operator of his media newsletter. We run our own media newsletter. Just owning that channel as opposed to, relying on Facebook and all these other, and Google SEO and all these, fickle channels. Like, it really does seem like we're seeing new newsletters stand up every day that are viable, thriving businesses. So there really is a boom still going on in this space.
And do you, like, in terms of like communicating the importance of newsletters, like how important is like first party data? Like even with Substack, which has not the greatest analytics in the world compared to some more robust ones, I can see exactly who is signing up for my newsletter. I see the domain. I can like list on my sponsorships page, these are the companies that read my newsletter, which I think is a big calling card. I can also embed polls to collect more data. When you look at the newsletter advertising landscape, do you see some of the best campaigns or are really kind of leveraging that first party data and trying to really communicate the value of their audience in that way, in a way that like, a traditional news site can't do because they don't really have that granular of analytics?
Yeah, I mean, I think the newsletters doing this best are really taking advantage of that. I mean, I remember when we were working with TLDR back in the day, like they had Dan, the founder there, had already done a great job on his landing page, and that was one of his big selling points. Is like readers at these companies, and you can see, yeah, this audience has developers at Microsoft, at Google, at Apple, at every big company you could think of. And that's just such a powerful thing to be able to tell advertisers, especially in the B2B space. And I don't know how many folks here are kind of in B2B versus more consumer niches, but B2B newsletters are one of the great success stories right now that we should probably dive into. I would just say collect what data you can. I mean, yeah, Substack's obviously very limited on like what you can see as far as people on click through and what they report to you. But Beehive and ConvertKit and all the others probably do a little bit better job on that. So you really can track like who's clicking. And so, collect that data. Like I talk to people sometimes, and we hear from bigger media brands or like medium-sized media brands who really feel like, oh, to get first-party data, I'm going to have to bring in some survey firm and pay them tens of thousands of dollars as a consulting contract. To which I just say, no, you don't. Set up a type form, set up a Google sheet, a Google form. Just do your own survey. That is enough for most of the sponsors you're going to be dealing with, and just get some kind of first party data and go to market with it.
Yeah, well, speaking of the power of B2B, especially for newsletters, Arpit, you had a question.
Yeah,
was I pronouncing your name correctly?
That's perfect. Arpit is correct.
Okay,
Thank you. So I was asking if you have tips for someone who operates in a super niche, like who operates a super niche newsletter in the B2B space, which is what I do, right? Companies that sort of I'm already running ads, and company that I work with, they have pretty significant budgets, right? So, but at the end of the day, this is a super specific niche. The audiences are not huge. So, do you have tips on how to approach sponsorships and how to figure out pricing? And a follow-up question was basically like how to better figure out your audience, because a lot of people subscribe using their personal emails, right? Which I think I prefer, because when people use their work emails, there's a lot of, eventually when they move on, those emails bounce. So yeah, I mean, two separate questions, but yeah.
Yeah, before Ryan jumps into it, like one piece of advice I would give, since you're like ultra niche, is running polls within your newsletter to divide your audience by job title, whether it's like project manager or engineer, different stuff like that. Also run polls to find out what the size of their organization is. Is this a company that has 500 plus people? Like get really granular in the kinds of polls that you can embed in your newsletter, so you can give like really good granular data on who they are. But in terms of pitching, Ryan, what do you if someone was coming to you and they had a very niche B2B vertical, what kind of advice would you give?
Sure. I mean, the first thing I'd say is, you probably are subscribed to everything else in your niche, so that's the first thing to do. I'd also, go through the sign up flows at some of the bigger B2B publishers. Go sign up, even if they don't have something in your specific niche. Go sign up for some work week newsletters. Go sign up for all the Morning Brew, like vertical newsletters, their B2B newsletters, Smart Brief, Industry Dive. You'll see their sign up flows, and they collect, a lot of data on that first sign up flow. And then you can drip out other questions and other surveys, throughout the year as after you've onboarded them, and anytime really. So, doing that kind of first party data is very important. There are enrichment tools. I haven't delved a ton into this, but like you can run your list obviously through. I know Clearbit does some of this, and I'm sure there's plenty of subscription like enrichment tools that can kind of flesh out that stuff for you. But doing that is a big first step. And then I think you were asking about pricing, and so we have I'll drop a link in here in a second when I'm not talking, but we have an ad calculator that we use. Which has some different categories in terms of like consumer, and then more focused like special interest consumer, and then B2B. B2B obviously has the most variation because different businesses are going to have different margins, but like you can, not knowing anything about your situation, my guess is you're charging too little, because that's usually what we find when we get under the hood with folks, is like they're just not charging enough. They're being shy about their rates. So, whatever it is, double it. But seriously, our calculator is a jumping off point. And then we're honestly always happy to jump on a call with anyone, whether they're, a prospective or client or not, just to talk about the industry and give you the best advice we can, because I know it sounds corny, but Jesse and I care a lot about independent media and seeing stuff succeed. So honestly, truthfully, we field these kinds of calls all day, every day, for people who aren't really prospective clients. So don't be shy to reach out to us. And we'll give you the best advice we can.
I certainly will. Thank you so much.
Arpit, did you have any other questions?
I think Ryan answered both my questions. So
okay.
Thank you.
Maurizio, hopefully I'm pronouncing that name correctly. You had a question about selling in newsletters versus on the owned and operated site.
Yep. Yeah, you got it, Simon. Yeah, so kind of my predicament is I run a fairly large newsletter, and one of the things that I've kind of gone back and forth on is, I have an opportunity to insert ads from a large kind of ad consolidator, if you will. And so they'll handle kind of the serving of the ads and the pairing of my business with advertisers, which is great. And it's kind of a lucrative revenue channel that I'm seeking to explore. However, kind of my hesitation there is that I primarily use my newsletter to, not only keep in touch with my audience, but also to kind of funnel them to where I'd like them to see certain, advertisers or sponsors and those kind of things. So I'm hesitant to double dip, if you will, in that way, because I'm kind of worried about losing subscribers when they're, not only seeing ads kind of where I direct them, but also kind of in the newsletter copy itself. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on doing that, and whether you've seen other newsletters, see a reduction in subscribers the minute you turn on ads. I think that's everybody's kind of fear. Like, am I going to lose, 25% of my subscriber base?
Yeah, so a couple of different things to unpack there. I mean, I definitely get like people before they have instituted ads will get folks who are worried like, oh, is my audience going to have some horrible reaction to this and unsubscribe if they start seeing ads? I've got to say, the number of people who feel like really strongly about that kind of stuff is vanishingly small. I've just really never seen that happen in real life. I get it as a fear for publishers, but like I haven't seen that. And relatedly, we'll see people say like, okay, we're going to have like a pro version or a paid version on top of our free version. And one of the selling points is, oh, you're paying me $5 a month. You're not going to see ads anymore. That's part of my selling point. Usually the audience isn't even asking for that. And the people who are paying are like your highest income, your most engaged. So like I would not ever do that and take like your best audience members right out of your audience. Like I don't think Simon doesn't do that. Like Simon has ads and free readers, and he's not going to take his ads out of the free version. So like, and then as a traffic thing, I just think the scale of it is like, people are going to click on what they're going to click on, right? It's if they're interested in the content. I think the number of users who are going to be sidetracked by an ad and then never come back to an article they're interested in is just vanishingly small. It's just not something I would worry about. And then, yeah, I mean, as far as publishers who use this kind of idea in concert, again, I'd say look at Industry Dive, look at Smart Brief, Industry Dive in particular, where they're doing a lot of their newsletter advertising it's really sponsored content that they're using their large database of newsletters to drive people to the sponsored content. So they're very successful, and that's like a really good model of what marrying those strategies can look like.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about the ad-free model and whether that gets people to become subscribers. When we get to talking about Carla, I know I was looking at the membership stuff for TED, and one of their benefits was the ad-free versions of the show. So I'll look forward to hearing a little bit more about that. Yeah, in terms of, I agree with you that like, they're not going to care if there are ads on the website. I would say that people start to notice if you have like lots of abusive ad tech on the website. Like I've gotten to the point where I barely even click on Forbes links anymore, just because I know it's going to, just crash my web browser. So I think, there's always going to be, a balance there, but maybe newsletter ads will get you so you can have less abusive ad tech because you're monetizing in another way. And so you can have, cleaner ads on your website. Jennifer, you had a question.
Yeah, hi, Ryan. So I'm trying to figure out a good way to, I guess, position for sponsors and advertisers. So it's a new music publication, and as it's evolving, it's niching down more and more into folks who are more in the, I would say, creator economy part of music. And it's not just the performing acts, so it's also like your people who produce shows and events, but also like people who are producing the actual music on the side, on the production side. And so my background is a lot of B2B media, and I'm leaning that way. But I guess I'm just curious if you had any thoughts about, the audience is a little bit of a hybrid in that, a lot of the features are music acts and big names and stuff like that. And also, just side note, it's print and digital, but the print is pretty infrequent. So do you think it's necessary to kind of stake a claim in, like, are we going for a B2B type folks, or is it a B2C? And the reason I'm asking is just because I think I've seen stuff from you before where the audience can be much smaller for a B2B play versus if it's a B2C play, you have to have a lot bigger numbers. And yeah, so just any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. What you've heard from me before is correct. I would lean into the B2B, I'd lean into the creator, look at stuff like Future Party, look at stuff like Publish Press, who are, great in those spaces. Yeah, I mean, you're just gonna have a much easier time monetizing creators, for obvious reasons, like music consumers is kind of anyone. There's no real angle there. I mean, except for like very specific like music related consumer products. But once you get into, people whose business is music and people whose business is creation and marketing of that music, well, first of all, you've got every marketing advertiser in the world is suddenly relevant to you. Anything aiming at the creator economy is suddenly relevant to you. So yeah, I mean, anyone doing any space, I'm probably going to advise you, if there's a B2B angle, lean into that B2B angle. And if there's a way to niche down in the consumer, niche down in the consumer. It's always better to be more concentrated and have a much, cleaner idea of what your audience might be interested in buying versus, oh, it's kind of for everyone. I think that creator angle is really strong.
Yeah, and I think the reason B2C does so well with independent publishers is they're able to, because each B2B product tends to cost a lot more than most consumer products, unless you're talking about like luxury or automotive or something like that, then the B2B publishers actually get a lot of, or B2B advertisers get a lot of value, because if they just convert one or two people from your audience into a customer, then that's sometimes like a 6-figure or 7-figure payout for them. So they see a lot of value from those smaller, more engaged audiences, versus if you're B2C, you have to get to such huge scale before a lot of consumer advertisers even are in, because like they're using usually like advertising agencies and stuff who aren't even going to be interested in you unless you are generating millions upon millions of impressions. So a lot of it's just a difference of scale. Be sure, we're going to keep on talking to Ryan for just a few more minutes before we switch over to Carla. So definitely add your questions in for Ryan before we switch over. Ryan, like you see in like the podcasting space for years, it was all it was all direct response advertising, where they were specifically wanting you to click on a link, put in a discount code so that they could track it. And the industry is now slowly moving over to brand advertising. When you're looking at the weekly overview of who's advertising in newsletters, what kind of breakdown are you seeing in terms of like direct response? They're trying to drop a link, drive a sale, versus more broad brand advertising.
Yeah, I think email remains very much a direct response medium outside of your truly huge, truly scaled brands, and these are the ones that are just going to be your household names. Morning Brew, Skim. I think 1440 is probably scaled close to that at this point. They're at a couple million. So really. Especially and B2B, B2B is obviously trying to, drive that white paper download or whatever they're trying to drive. So it is really a pretty direct response space at the end of the day. And we always recommend trying to get around agencies in this space. Like our build is very much based on like, go to the company, go to the sponsor first. If they kick you to an agency, so be it. But agency processes, especially for almost anyone who would be on this call, agency processes, request for proposal, RFP, that stuff can be a year plus sales cycle, filling out endless paperwork and endless bureaucracy. You want to reach somebody who's a head of marketing at a small company, or a performance marketing manager at a bigger company, and just get them to test something really quickly with you. Like usually these folks with email, can press play on a couple, few $1,000 in testing without it turning into some agency, request for proposal process. So, keep things transactional, and yeah, you're mostly going to see like pretty direct response stuff.
So given that you're saying direct response is the way to go, and it's going to be very transactional and very tied to ROI that you're driving directly, if you were giving advice to a newsletter creator, publisher, on how to design ad products that really cater to that, whether it's trying to help the advertiser create a white paper or a webinar, something where you can see the actual one-to-one transaction of someone giving over an email address or making a purchase. Like, what kind of advice would you give for how to design your advertising offering?
Yeah, so I mean, exactly. This is the kind of stuff that's becoming a lot more important, especially with, the dreaded MPP and Apple changes. The tracking of your links is going to be really tough. So having stuff pushed to dedicated landing pages for your newsletter, like, I won't say most, a lot of brands can like quickly stand up a dedicated landing page with like your brand's name in it so that they can see, specifically that traffic must have come from your newsletter, or set up a coupon code so that they can see the redemptions on that coupon code. So, really having like ironclad attribution is helpful on stuff where they're really tracking, like, how many leads did I get? How many new customers did I get? How many pairs of shoes did I sell? And beyond that, like, what makes the ad successful? I mean, the thing that I love that Jesse, my business partner, loves about this stuff is like, it is that voice. I mean, that's what really sets a newsletter advertising apart from your Facebook, your Meta advertising. Is like, the newsletter is, in the ideal scenario, really kind of lending their credibility and able to like stand behind that this is a good product for my audience. And, in the B2B space, hey, this is something I use. I use this landing page builder, and you should go use them too. So, being able to lend that direct one-to-one voice and credibility and sort of social proof is what makes email powerful versus, a banner ad, a Facebook ad, something in another medium like that. So take advantage of what this medium, allows that other media don't.
Yeah, and Arpit has a question about, whether you should accept multiple ads in each issue or just keep it to a single advertiser. This kind of also ties into a question I have, is should you feel comfortable putting an ad right at the beginning of the newsletter? Like, I used to fear that it would turn off my readers, that they had to first scroll through an ad, but I've seen it happen enough now to where I'm feeling more comfortable to putting that sponsorship message first and knowing that my readers will actually, stick with it. What are your thoughts on both of those issues?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, speaking as somebody who's very comfortable with ads, I guess it doesn't bother me. I mean, if you look at the newsletters that do this most successfully on the B2C side, you're looking at, your Morning Brews and Skims who've been doing that format from the beginning, where the logo sponsorship and then the sponsored item 2 or 3 down. Just thinking of B2B newsletters in like our media space that I read, I'm thinking, Simon, yours, maybe I haven't seen your most recent ads, but I know your ads used to be a little further down. I know Jacob Donnelly, his media operator, kind of has like a sentence or two of intro, then the sponsor, and then continues with the content. And like, yeah, I think you want to get those clicks for the sponsor if you want them to hand over a big check. So it's, I think readers are fairly sophisticated that like, yeah, I'm getting this content for free because the sponsor is helping to pay the bills. So I think that's safe. Sorry, to get back to the 2 ads in an issue. So that's really an inventory management thing where what we always counsel brands who are newer to advertising, newer to sponsorship when they come to us, is just simpler is better. 1 unit, don't complicate things. Never have, okay, we have our premium logo sponsorship that costs $5,000, or you can buy the secondary sponsorship that costs $250, because every single time they're going to buy your $250 sponsorship. So never do that to yourself. Start out with 1 ad product, 1 main sponsorship, the big one. When you've got that one sold out for 3 to 6 months ahead of time, then maybe put a secondary ad that's in a link roundup, just a link with an asterisk kind of thing. And then ultimately, like with a really mature program, I know that, like, again, look at like 1440 has a logo sponsorship, and then kind of a secondary, and then a tertiary. And then you can do a buyout of all those spots at once that's like super premium. So, when you're that guy who has, a million plus, huge B2C newsletter, maybe try that. But like, I wouldn't screw around with that early on. At worst, maybe that secondary slot, you can stick in some affiliate links, like something that's not a sponsorship you sell, but that's just like, if for whatever reason it works organically, like this is a product people might want to know about who read my newsletter, and you have an affiliate relationship, then, I wouldn't mind, I would never say to hold off on that. That's fine. But never, ever, ever early on give them the choice between like the really expensive thing and the really cheap thing, because that's gonna hurt. That's gonna hurt.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Ryan, thanks for joining us today. People might not know this, but Who Sponsors Stuff has a free newsletter that has like a sampling of who's subscribing or who's sponsoring different newsletters. So if you want to kind of just sample the product and get some value out of that, I'm sure Ryan will be more than happy to drop the link into the chat. And also, if you feel comfortable, if any of my audience members want to ask you follow-up questions, maybe dropping your email address into the chat. Carla, I want to switch over to you. As I was explaining before you jumped on, is you and I have actually met in person. This was back when you were at DNA Info, which was kind of like you were doing audience development, and it was like a series of local news sites. And then you went on to, run audience development for the Wall Street Journal. And Wall Street Journal, one of the things it's famous for is they were really early on to the paywall game. They never really bought into, all content should be free. And they didn't even really have a metered paywall. They had more of a hard paywall where some stuff was in front of the paywall, but a lot of it was behind, completely behind the hard paywall. You had to pay to access it. So going from like a free news site to a one with a hard paywall, how did you have to reorient your thinking when moving, to that kind of new environment where you were going to be pushing people towards hitting a hard paywall? Did that change anything from like an audience development type of point of view?
Yeah, I mean, it was incredibly challenging to make that transition, but one of the things that I loved discovering was that the core of engagement skills and tactics really should translate across the board. I've never been one who is just chasing cheap clicks, and a lot of the tactics that frankly, like headlines, clickbait kind of headlines, things of that nature were never part of my game. So understanding that there needed to be specific value that is being handed to the audience, no matter what distribution platform you're on, no matter what is happening. When you're communicating with the audience, you have to present them with something that feels valuable, whether or not they click on that link. And building that kind of trust, both at DNA and then over at the Wall Street Journal, wound up converting into loyal audiences. So with an understanding that some of them were going to come to the site and convert to subscribers, and some of them at that point in time, at that point in their user journey, might not, but we were building a relationship with them that is much longer serving.
Did you find yourself kind of mining stuff that was behind the paywall and putting it on the social media channels and stuff like that so that they would get value from those channels and maybe retweet it or share it on a channel, even if they weren't paid subscribers and couldn't access all of the content?
Absolutely. So definitely, I mean, Twitter at that point in time was still an effective way of building buzz, if not driving traffic, because I would say my experience for the most part since maybe 2012 is that Twitter was not actually a traffic driving tool. It was a buzz building tool. So, media people, journalists, people with large audiences, maybe retweeting or talking about a piece of your content, that's where that was really effective. But in terms of actually clicking, it wasn't. I think it was the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, at the Journal, we launched on Snapchat. And that was I used to say, like, we were the least cool publication on the coolest publication, platform at that time.
And we were incredibly intentional about exactly what you just described. What were we going to mine from the journal's incredible reporting? What could we really, how could we repurpose that storytelling to bring it to a very different audience, far more female, far younger than what the journal was reaching on O&O? And how can we start building a relationship there? And the purpose there, again, was not to drive clicks to the site right away, to have somebody leave Snap and go to WSJ.com. And by the way, that took like a huge amount of education in the newsroom, that wasn't our primary goal. That the primary goal was that we believe through our research, through our audience analytics, that there is an era in your life when you become a Wall Street Journal subscriber. But you need to have a relationship with this platform, with this publication, where you trust the publication and you want to build a relationship. So when the moment does come, maybe when you get that first job, when you are promoted to a management role, where you start understanding the importance of having this trusted one-on-one relationship with the journal. And we understood that we needed to start that journey far earlier. You can't just start speaking to people when they're, approaching their late 20s. Many others are much younger and entrepreneurial and became subscribers earlier. But we found that people really started subscribing to the journal, when they had more money to be able to subscribe, and when they had an actual, when the value proposition aligned with their goals and their career, their stage of their career.
So I know like the Wall Street Journal does put some stuff in front of the paywall. I'm sure your team was involved in those discussions. What were some, when you were looking into the analytics and when you were advising them on what to put in front of and behind the paywall, what were some of your learnings from that?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. We were incredibly involved in that. And so I was responsible for bringing audience analytics into the newsroom. It used to be a business side only function. And anybody who's familiar with journalism, there's this very firm wall between the business side and the actual newsroom. I think the reality of digital journalism has changed some of that, where you have much more access to data and things of that nature that can inform content decisions. And that was the entry point. We started being able to see like where were referrals coming from? Where were we seeing the most loyal readers and audience members? And where was the biggest opportunity to bring them along this funnel and capture their attention, build that loyalty, have them engage with us on a deeper level, and then hopefully convert to a subscription or become a member, right? Down the road, which is a much higher ticket price, where you could join one of our councils, right? So we have I still say we, it's been 5 years since I've been at the journal, but where you could really become a member of the CEO Council or one of these C-suite level memberships where you were actually able to engage with one another on a deeper level than just a transactional subscription level, which is, first click free, frankly, with Google, which was what we really started exploring. That was the entry point for a lot of people to be able to kind of peek behind the curtain and start building that relationship. And I will say
I know that a lot of publishers now are doing this first click thing, like for Twitter, coming in through Twitter, first click free. Did the Wall Street Journal, did you experiment with different channels, making it so you could have like a free gift link or whatever on Instagram? What were you doing there?
Yeah, it was. So one of the first things was actually a gift link, which now has become like very popular and commonplace, a gift link to subscribers as a benefit, right? So if you're a subscriber, you can actually share a specific URL, which will allow your friends and family to be, or your network to be able to get into an article. So that was one of the first things that we experimented with. I would say beyond the platforms, the first click free negotiations were really with Google. And if you really take a look at what News Corp continues to lead the way in having discussions with mega platforms like Google, it's around AI, right? But back then it was really about, can we get past your paywall? And then after the discussions with Google, really it was around Twitter, etc. Facebook was part of that. That was less of a battle, frankly. It was more the battles had to be waged with these other platforms first.
Laura in the chat asked whether you were using the Google News Initiative tools while working there. I had Amy Adams on my podcast a year ago, and she was talking about all of these tools. Were you using those?
We were using them, and the Journal was part of the Google News Initiative, one of the partners to launch a lot of things. AMP was a big project that we worked on with them, and that definitely scaling down. I was laughing when you were talking about all of the different pop-ups and not, being afraid to click on a link. Part of why the Journal explored AMP with Google as part of that initiative was, how can we actually provide a stripped down, better user experience for the audience, so that when they have the opportunity to peek behind that curtain, it's as optimized an opportunity, as fast on your mobile screen as possible. There were some really interesting findings around that. I think it ties back to the point that you were making around, whether the headlines that say that people want ad-free experiences actually line up with what we see our audience doing. I think it was really like a vocal minority that was looking for that kind of experience. And we found that the people who were most loyal, who were really interested in the valuable content behind that paywall, like that faster experience didn't necessarily yield greater conversions. The ad-free experience doesn't necessarily yield higher engagement or greater conversions.
Yeah. Ellen, you had a question for Carla.
Yeah, hi, Carla. I worked for the Boston Globe for many years and now have started a nonprofit digital news site in Brookline, where I live, suburb of Boston. It's got 65,000 people. Our newsletter is weekly. It's free. We have 3,000 members and about 3,000 lurkers. But we're debating whether it's off-putting to people reading a free digital site to link out to the Boston Globe in articles. The Globe has a pretty hard paywall at this point. What's the best practice there?
I think transparency is the most incredible, the most important thing that I would say to you. So just this very simple parentheses at the end of a URL, letting people know this is going to a paywall, that can be just that effort that you're putting forth is incredibly useful. I think that the experience of clicking on the link and not knowing that that's going to a paywall, that can ruin a relationship. So just that teeny tiny step of transparency of where you're linking is really important. I would also say, if there is the possibility of gift links, really exploring that. And again, same thing, saying this is a gift link. There is a lot of power in that word gift. Frankly, even if they don't click on that link, they are going to feel like you gave them something, and that is valuable. Especially for those lurkers that you were talking about. I feel like there's something there that you can cultivate with some of these tactics. Education is another piece. like explaining why is it that you're pushing to this paywall, like helping people to understand that this is mission driven, which is something that I wanted to mention in this discussion. The power of mission driven tactics, whether it's a membership, whether it's subscriptions, that is so incredibly powerful. And if you can really tap into that language and have people feel like they are a partner with you, that is going to build loyalty and down the road may convert to monetization opportunities.
Yeah, and I'm seeing more and more newsletters utilize those gift links strategically to kind of, add an extra benefit to subscribing to my newsletters. I actually pay to subscribe to a lot of these things, and I'm giving you this specific link that lets you pass this site's paywall. And I'm sure the sites themselves like it because I'm sending them potential customers or influencers in that field. But speaking of mission, so you also worked at TED, which, unlike the Journal, doesn't really it has a paywall in the sense that you have to pay a lot of money to go to a live actual
Right.
TED Talk, but it puts out a lot of free content, the recordings on YouTube, it has like the TED Radio Hour, it has now several podcasts and stuff like that. You were on the team that designed membership for them, which is completely opposite from what you're doing at the Wall Street Journal. So when you were designing a membership where most of your content was free, how was your strategy different than what you were doing at the Wall Street Journal?
Yeah, so on that scale of transactional versus altruism, TED is particularly around the membership program that we launched. We really wanted it to be somewhere smack in the middle. And in many ways, TED is unique in that regard. So one goal and pillar that we really wanted to follow was that we wanted to keep spreading those ideas globally for free, right? And while we were giving, these loyal digital and global audiences the chance to connect and support and gain additional insights through access to some of what you were just describing. So like one of the things that we initially thought about when we launched was that we had a hypothesis that there's a really engaged, loyal digital audience globally that would want to support TED, just support TED, that they didn't need anything. They didn't need events. They didn't need access to anything. On the other side was the possibility that actually they would be really interested in exclusive access to some of our content. And what over the course, the membership was launched in the spring of 2021. And what we actually found was that it was kind of a blend of those two things, that there was a very loyal, engaged audience that just wanted to support TED. But those people were and are incredible ambassadors for the content. And they were actually an incredible lever that we could tap into that would spread the ideas even further. Additionally, you had some people who joined membership who said, yes, I really believe in TED's mission. And I also want to feel more part of TED's community. I want a space where I can engage. I want a space where I feel like I can see other faces, much like this call, Simon, like where people could see, oh, somebody's calling in from India, somebody's calling in from Argentina, somebody's in, the US. That's really exciting. I feel like I'm part of a movement. And a small percentage really wanted access. They wanted to be able to access one of our sessions from the conference, or they wanted to be able to sit in a Zoom, very scrappy, a Zoom like this with a speaker premiering a talk, and then be able to ask some questions. What we were really adamant about was that after the fact of that event, that we were still going to distribute that piece of content in an optimized way across all of our channels, reaching 100 million followers across all of these different channels, like a really amazing scale. But the core of it, we knew had to be like deeper engagement, because that at the core, that's what TED is about, whether it's this exclusive conference that you're describing, or TEDx events or TED Ed work with educators and kids. It's all centered on community.
Yeah, that aligns perfectly with what I've written about in my own newsletter, that you should view your subscriber base as like on a spectrum. So on the one end of the spectrum, it's people wanting to, the only reason they're subscribing is they want to access your content behind a paywall. And then the other end of the spectrum is people who are just subscribing because they want to support you. And a lot of your audience is somewhere between those two. So you need to design messaging that's like hitting them at all those different points, where you're doing more kind of mission oriented messaging, and then also messaging this is what you're missing out on if you're not a subscriber. You mentioned the live events. I wonder if there was a feedback loop there where you were doing the live event, you had to be a paying member, then you were distributing it for free to their huge audience. And there were members of the audience who were getting like FOMO because they're seeing everyday people getting to ask these people questions and participate and stuff like that. And that made them want to become paying members. Like, did you notice anything in terms of that feedback loop where you're creating almost like a flywheel effect of the member only live calls and then distributing that as like on-demand content?
Absolutely. We definitely saw that the events, when we were promoting the events, so I very strongly feel, in my experience, that content marketing that is derived from editorially driven content, right? So anything that has been authentically, to use an overused word, created by the publication is going to do much better. It's going to perform much better at converting people. So number one, it had to be editorially driven, those events that I'm describing. And we found that very consistent labeling of the conversations, that this was a TED member event, making sure that, you know, you saw the person who was doing the interview at least in one shot, rather than just the person on the virtual stage. That was really important. And then literally just the blurb when we're sending out our newsletter, letting somebody know that this event was in front of a live virtual audience and that people were able to ask questions, and that if you want to do so, you can become a member as well and be part of that. That I think was incredibly important. The other piece I just wanted to mention is that the people who attend the annual conference in Vancouver, they also were a big help within this, spreading the word. And what was interesting is, you know, I ran the social media, all of the social media platforms for TED. And when we showed behind the scenes content on our social platforms, that FOMO was negative. People did not want that kind of FOMO. They felt like, I'm never going to be able to attend this conference. Why are you showing this to me? Just show me the talks.
Yeah.
But when it had to do with membership, the access point felt much more open to them. So being really thoughtful about that journey, I think, is really key and was a really interesting insight for myself.
Yeah, because the TED conference that costs thousands of dollars and is invite only, was your online content, was that really doing anything to drive stuff to the live, like especially the most expensive live events, or was that not even really a factor of what you were thinking about, like in terms of your purview?
No, it was definitely a factor. I just want to clarify one thing, because I didn't even know this before I joined. You can apply to attend TED. TED attendance is not invite only. And this is something like the education that I was talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, what a fun ride that is to help people understand that TED is a nonprofit, that you can apply to attend, that it's unfortunately, a lot of people see TED as a very elite organization, and in many ways I understand why that is, but it's actually very open tent, or intended to be an open tent type event. With all of that said, distributing the content is not enough. You have to have that education piece in order to be able to get people to your conference. And when I first joined TED, the work that my team was doing was very, very focused only on the talks and editorial content. And over my tenure at TED, we actually brought marketing under my umbrella. And the intention there was to ensure that we had editorially derived content that was within integrity of, TED's tent poles around content, but that we could leverage the different pieces of content to be able to then market. So there's a conference marketing team that is constantly looking at the content and thinking through, like, how do we leverage organic success and drive tickets, like have that aligned CTA that's going to, through targeting, that's going to bring in a qualified audience to the in-person conference. I gave you this number, 100 million followers on social. You can imagine the percentage of people who can pay $10,000. There's a starter $5,000 and then a $7,000 level, but these are big ticket numbers. You can imagine that it's a percentage of that huge number, but it's not insignificant.
Yeah. It also speaks to something that I think a lot of businesses should do or media businesses is they need to have things that are at different price points that's super, like every publisher should sell something that's super expensive, and every publisher should have something that's free, and everybody, there should be advertising and then maybe some kind of membership / subscription thing. So I feel like, TED is one of those organizations that excel at all those different points. Anyway, we're coming up at the end of the hour. I don't want to hold my featured guests longer since it's the only amount of time that they blocked out. I want to thank them so much. I think, Ryan, you already put your email address in. Carla, no pressure, but if you do feel comfortable, I feel like we just hit the tip of the iceberg. There's so many more insights you could share. If you feel comfortable putting your email address in, so any of my readers or my audience can follow up with you. And thank you so much, Carla and Ryan. You can both leave or stay, whether you want. I just wanted to stay a few extra minutes to see if there's anything anyone else on the call wants to ask me, or any kind of, anything on the call that really resonated with you, or something that you would want to share about your own experience. Charlie, I know that in terms of the mission-driven, no paywall type of thing, that's something that you've been practicing with great effect with your local newsletter. I don't know if you and Ellen know each other, but you're both kind of working on similar local news, mission-oriented type stuff. Ellen, you're from the Boston Globe. Charlie, you were originally from the Chicago Tribune.
Well, I wouldn't say originally. It was
yeah.
It was a place I worked.
Yeah.
But yes, about a decade there.
Yeah. So, Charlie, in terms of, and I'd love to hear from both you and Ellen, in terms of what you're seeing in terms of the local space convert people into paying members, where they're actually giving you money without, locking it behind. Charlie, you want to start with you?
Simon, I think, as you know, about 17% of the people who get Chicago Public Square, voluntarily, just the subtext is to keep me from quitting, are paying about $6.70 a month, just to encourage the work that we're doing. I think it's a really good model. It's basically a public broadcasting model, and I think it's a win-win for an awful lot of organizations, whether they're profit or not.
Yeah, Ellen, what about you? What are you seeing converting your readership at your local publication into paying members? What's convincing them to? What are your conversion channels for getting people to pay?
The conversion channels we have an NPR model as well. We are partnering with a popular independent bookstore to do sign-up sheets. We've had 7 house parties that have brought in actually everything from $5 a month to $25,000 a year. So it's a combination of outreach to public-minded individuals in town, Thanks to Gannett Media, which shut down the Brookline tab last year, we have a lot of goodwill.
Yeah. One thing I wonder about, and maybe this is a question for Ryan, is I have talked to a lot of local news entrepreneurs, and they're getting better at getting people to pay, especially with memberships, but they're still struggling with the ad sales side. Ryan, are you seeing in your database a lot of local advertising, or is there still a lot of uphill education for local advertisers to see the power of newsletters?
Yeah, local is incredibly difficult, as anyone on this call probably knows. Tracking that sort of thing from like a business perspective for us would be nearly impossible. Every city in America, and Joe's Diner is taking out ads. I mean, it really doesn't work. There probably is a model where if to provide a service like ours to a large network of local sites who could then go and sell nationally. And that's actually what a Patch is doing. Patch is a client. It's they're doing that. They have national ad sales, and 6 a.m. City is a client of ours who uses us for a lot of their national stuff. And then they have the local sales teams, which are separate. So yeah, local ad sales are obviously really difficult. It works best in a networked environment. And most local publishers just obviously don't have the resources to, maybe even have a full-time, salesperson. So yeah, it's incredibly difficult. I think local usually works better at, sorry, I'm just saw a comment on there. Local doesn't scale. It's caught my eye. Really, membership to me strikes me as for most local, if you're doing something local, I know the Brooklyn Eagle here has that, and I talked to them ages ago. Setting something up with whether it's Pico or whether it's one of the other membership services, is probably how I would tackle that first. Yeah.
Chris Schroeder, you run a network of local newsletters. Do you have any kind of advice on finding advertisers and convincing them of the value of newsletters versus, I think a lot of them are spending a lot of money on Google ads and Facebook ads still, that's because it's so easy and so self-service.
Hi, Simon. Yes, I normally, our organization has been membership fees, where we do all the back of the house work for newsletters in about 24 different markets around the country. And they handle their own sponsor sales, but we are just next month pivoting to where we're going to be focusing nationally on selling sponsorships. And so I'm very interested in Ryan's services and what that might cost. And so hopefully in a few months, I'll be able to answer that question personally better. Mm-hmm. But we've been successful locally. New Orleans is our most successful model, where they have 10 local sponsors that pay $500 to $1,000 each. And so she's making money with her platform.
Yeah. The Mohammed from Overstory was on. I think he jumped off, but one thing that he was doing with his network of sites is he was making them he would only sell ads in one category. So if you were one of the local automotive sales dealerships, he would only sell ads to one automotive dealership, and once you were that person, it would almost be like a subscription. So you'd pay $1,000 or however much a month, and then once a month you got an ad in, and he would guarantee you that he would not sell any other ads to any other businesses in that category. So there would be a restaurant category, there'd be a healthcare category, and then he would run it like a subscription where you had to buy one ad per month for 12 months. And then that way he created a sense of FOMO, and it helped him in his ad sales of when he was going to a potential, advertising partner and be your competitor, their subscription is coming to an end in October, and now we're going to have an opening in that vertical. Do you want that? And so that would give them a sense of urgency that if they didn't, close the deal, then that ad slot might go to one of their competitors. So that was one interesting sales tactic that I saw. What else are people experiencing? Francis, I don't think we've heard from you at all, if you're available.
Well, I was a co-founder of Cityside, which has two sites, Berkeley side and the Oakland side, but I've been gone for about a year. Cityside sells a lot of local ads, but it was a process of education. Of course, when we started in the beginning, no one knew about it. No one knew what digital ads were. But over time, we always had a dedicated salesperson, which was helpful because they were able to build relationships in the community. And, now, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it is a significant part of Cityside's revenue stream. So it can be done. Of course, the big question is, do you have enough revenue to have a dedicated salesperson? And that is always the conundrum. It's like so many small sites just don't have that revenue. And it would be really interesting if, some sites could come together and sort of, combine money in order to hire someone to do ad sales in different regions. Because otherwise, I don't know how like 1 and 2 people sites are ever going to be able to afford a full-time salesperson.
Yeah. One of the things, speaking to what Carla was talking about with like the mission-oriented thing for memberships, I've seen some local publishers do that on the advertising side, where they would go to local businesses and be like, it's within, and kind of make this argument, it's within your kind of public service interest to advertise on my newsletter or whatever, because you are supporting a locally owned news source versus just framing it around ROI that we're going to, drive you customers. Did you see any, did your ad salesperson see anything around that?
Absolutely. I think, using a strategy of being on this news site is building community. It's bringing information to the community. You're going to be seen as a good actor in supporting this news organization that's doing this. I think that really resonated, particularly with merchants in Berkeley, which is a pretty small town, but it's, with the university at the center. So it has a very engaged population. I think that's a very important strategy that you bring.
Yeah. And I've talked to some, I think IndieGraph, maybe they're doing something where they have some kind of centralized ad sales where they're helping all their partners sell ads by they're calling up, local companies and trying to get them to sponsor these newsletters. But when I worked in local newsletter or local newspapers, our ad salesperson lived in the county that we were in. They were actually showing up at businesses' doors. How important do you think it is that your ad salesperson lives locally versus you see a lot of these places like 6 a.m. City and Axios that have a more centralized sales staff?
I think I would have answered that question differently before the pandemic than after the pandemic. I think, of course, it's great to be local and know when a new store opens and a new store closes. You have to know the community. That's really, very important in order to know who to sell to. But I think the expectation that a salesperson is local has diminished because people just fled urban areas. And so, I don't think that has to happen. It probably makes it easier, but I think you can get around that.
Yeah, awesome. Martin, do you have any questions you want to throw up into the group or any kind of problems that you're tackling lately?
Thanks, Simon. Glad to see everyone. Actually, I got a lot of insight from all of you. Thank you very much. We're in Canada, and I work with a network of local media organizations. 24 of them that are in Francophone minority communities. So the model is kind of different. They have the same challenges in the sense that generating revenue is key. But because we are fortunate enough in Canada to get a lot of public funding to support a lot of those organizations. So the focus is less about selling membership and ads and more about creating better community engagement and getting more focused on bringing people together around the language, the minority language in those communities. So, but with all that is happening with the legislation and content distribution on the social media platforms, this is our next challenge is going to be tackling this and really building relationships closely with our potential readers and consumers, and building newsletter strategies. And, you know, it hasn't been important at all, although I've been talking about it with them for the last 3 years intensively, but it hasn't been on the radar since now, until now, now that we're just at the point of probably losing large distribution channels. So, so this is our next big focus right now. So.
Well, I wasn't expecting this, but Carla and Ryan were nice enough to stay on the call. Do you have any questions for them? Like Carla we didn't really get into this, but I'm guessing newsletters were the best conversion channel for all sorts of things.
I do understand that. Right now, what we're focusing on is really positioning each of our medias into not a better context, but with a clearer value proposition in their communities. But because right now they're just distributing news, but they haven't really positioned themselves as a specific actor in a certain niche doing certain things around content within the community. So we're going to be focusing a lot on how do they differentiate themselves compared to any other content distribution platform available, and there's lots of competition, you know.
Yeah,
so,
Carla, you worked at I was going to say you worked at DNA Info, which kind of didn't have a well-known brand. How did you communicate, you know, what this thing that Martin's talking about, the value and contextualizing, you know, what you were doing that maybe no other local news publisher in New York was doing?
Yeah, and Martin, my heart like feels for you, because I very much understand this challenge. I mean, DNA Info, please don't say this. Well, now it's gone, so I can say it, but the worst name on the planet, right? We launched, and I would go to these street fairs and people would come and say, so do you do like the cheek swab, or do you have to take blood? And I'd be like, no, we're a news organization. So I think there's a challenge in that, but there's also the nature of the work that you do. You have this enormous opportunity to really have a one-on-one connection, oftentimes in person. And there's like, don't forget that possibility. Those incredibly engaged and loyal readers then can become your friend on that distribution path. The other thing is, when you were just talking about this, and that is your value proposition, right? In this world of chasing scale, in this world of people, you know, epic loneliness, all of these kinds of things, we have these amazing news organizations that can actually bring community together. And I think often we're kind of sold that that's not what we should be doing, because we're chasing scale for revenue purposes, but really at the core, that's the beauty of it. With that said, as you were talking, I was curious if any of your organizations have worked on smaller scale one-to-one communication, like on Signal or Telegram or something like that. I feel like there could be an opportunity there to explore distribution on those encrypted platforms that might be interesting, especially because of what you were saying about the focus on language and preserving the sanctity of that throughout Canada. So I don't know, that was just a random thought that I had.
It's an excellent question. And my role within the organization is really as the manager of digital transformation. So that's what I do on a daily basis with all of my media members, is to guide them through those different choices. But from a marketing perspective as well. And we analyze some of those platforms, but the degree of use of those platforms in Canada and local communities is fairly low, if non-existent. So our focus will probably be still to build better communication channels through newsletters and trying to engage with, like I said, a better value proposition, more storytelling, and journalism that's actionable, not just relating facts that has happened yesterday, just trying to bring another level of journalism that's actionable within the community. So it's a lot of different changes at the same time. So, but I think it's a fertile time to do that. Within the next year is going to be interesting.
Well, just one thing to add to that. I would not discount the use in moments of crisis. So I completely hear you about, exploring whether or not people are actually active on these channels. But even at the Journal in, I think it was 2014, Charlie Hebdo, when that took place, there was a lot that we did on WhatsApp at that time. WhatsApp is now a complicated channel, but there was a lot where we were able to provide value in a moment of crisis. And that obviously is not sustainable over time. It's a pop-up kind of experience, but it's something to explore.
Yeah, Carla, what about SMS text messaging? Like we had Mike Donahue, the CEO of Subtext, as one of our featured guests a few weeks back. And there are lots of platforms now where you can just get your audience to enter their phone number, and then you can send them basically like an old school, almost not analog, but close to analog version of a push alert, or if something's breaking nearby, or different stuff like that. So it'd be interesting to see local publishers experiment with that. Okay, anybody else have any other questions before we sign off? Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with Francis's idea for maybe a league or a network of our networks, newsletters, that someone would sell it. Is there something like that now? I know when I was in newspapers, we had a national newspaper network. I wonder if there's anything for newsletters. Might be a new career path for you, Simon, to have a Simon Owens National Newsletter Advertising Network.
Yeah, start a trade organization. I know IndieGraph.
Yeah, exactly. IndieGraph.
Yeah. So IndieGraph, I think you have to be on their platform, but they do a lot of those kind of centralized services for local publishers. And I don't know what their terms were, but I think it's just a revenue share. I don't think you have to pay much up front. But
I called and talked with them, but we would have to drop our whole editorial and design platform, join theirs, just to get the possibility that they could then sell for us.
Yeah. That's the one downside. Okay, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording now.